Hi, I'm Paul Richards. I'm the Monitoring Officer for Sheffield and Rotherham Wildlife Trust. In these strange times, it's perhaps a bit difficult to get outside and get around our nature reserves, but if you're fortunate enough to have a back garden, then it's a really good opportunity for you to perhaps do a back garden bio-blitz. Bio-blitz is really where we just go out and have a look at a site and see how many species we can record. And if you're not an expert, you don't have to put a name to everything, but you can tell the difference between one thing and another. Then you can record those in your own way as a different kind of snail from another kind of snail, whatever it might be. So you don't have to be an expert, but if you do know one species from another, then that's great. And we can actually do what we call recording, which is making a note of what you've seen, where you've seen it, and the date on which you saw it. And that's really useful information for those people that can take that information and work out what species are becoming rare, which species are perhaps becoming more common, and relate that to issues like climate change and use that information to manage a site. Now, in your back garden there's loads of things that you could be looking for. We're going to have a look around my garden to see what we can find today, and well, I've got a slight bias towards the creepier and crawlier things, so there might be one or two little invertebrate species that we can have a closer look at. Let's come and have a look around my garden and see what we can do today. So here's one of my favourite bits of the garden. Not perhaps what everyone else might think of as the place for wildlife, but I love to look under things. And I've got this, just an old offcut of astroturf with some planks of wood underneath. And there's all sorts of creatures to be found under there, so let's just have a look, see what we can see. So let's have a look, what can we see here? There are some beautiful little rosy woodlice here, which we'll zoom in on in a second. A slug there, a slug up there, different clearly. So even if you don't know the difference between your leopard slugs and your netted slugs or whatever they are, you can still see that they're different, so you can record those as two different species for your bio-blitz. There are also quite a lot of these long, black, shiny Australian flatworms, of which I'll explain a bit more in a moment. And just a lot of little, there's some very small millipedes, again, which you perhaps can't see. So again, I'll turn over another piece of wood in a moment. Let's see what else there is. So this is not actually a leopard slug, it's a yellow slug. And they also have lovely blue antennae. Here's a lovely little rosy woodlouse. I think everyone thinks one woodlouse is much the same as another, but the rosy woodlouse is beautiful pink colour with a yellow stripe running down the back. So this is one of those millipedes. This is a thing called Cylindroaeolus caeruleus, sorry, no common name, but it has beautiful brassy rings around the body. Oh dear, look at that. Now, we've got here some pests. Quite a lot of pests in my garden. I'm sure you do the same, but these are New Zealand flatworms. So they're not good. They eat our earthworms, so we need to do something about that. These little black currant-like things, they're the eggs of the New Zealand flatworm. So again, these need to be removed. But as well as those, we've got lots of little white millipedes trotting around. There are some snails, quite a lot of things. So let's look at some of those things in detail. So here are those unpleasant New Zealand flatworms. Very much to be discouraged, as they do destroy earthworm communities. And as I say, that's an empty egg case, but they are very much like a black currant. So if you see those in your garden, they need to be removed. These are actually a notifiable pest, and the authorities have previously been notified of my pests, but they're still here, quite hard to get rid of, but very sticky. They produce a lot of slime. They're quite like a slug in that respect, but really very sticky thing. This dark chocolate colour with a very pale edge and a very pointy front end. Often when they sit curled up, they look like a sort of a rose with lots of petals, but yeah, not a nice creature really. It will feed on earthworms. The flatworms are very keen on sunshine, so you can see this one's rushing off trying to find somewhere dark to hide away. Here are a couple more of the New Zealand flatworms, sort of curled up in that rose petal manner, but behind there you can also see is this shiny black one. It's a different species. It's one of the Australian flatworms. This is Conticia ventrolineata. I don't think it has a common name. Just look at all of these flatworms, not happy being in the sun, not happy at all. But you can possibly see the two grey lines down the back of these. And these things actually feed on slugs, but just because they have some benefit to us from that point of view doesn't mean that they're a welcome thing in your garden. It's certainly an invasive alien species, and they're to be discouraged. There are lots of different slugs in the garden. This is a thing called the keeled slug, Tandonia budapestensis, great name. It's got this keel down the back which is distinctive, but there is another species which is quite similar, and the only way you can tell the difference is if you turn it over. This one has a dark line running down the centre of it, the sole of its foot. So that makes that one budapestensis. And there's a lovely centipede, one of the centipedes that has more than 35 pairs of legs, a geophilomorph. It's one that is very, very flexible, and they go into the soil in search of prey. They're carnivorous, unlike the millipedes. And this is a thing called Stigmatogasta subterranea. It lives in the soil. Little weevil there, look. Again, you don't need to know what all these things are. You just think, well, that's clearly different to any of the other beetles that you might have seen. So you can add that to your list as the little brown weevil. And weevils do like to play dead. Don't think this one played dead for quite long enough. We know you're alive. We can see you. The thing that makes it a weevil is they're quite funny. They have a long nose with bent antennae, like a television aerial at the front. That's what makes a weevil distinct from other kinds of beetles. Don't think you really want us to see your antennae at the front, because you're tucking them in while you pretend to be dead. I'll leave you alone. This is one of the sepia snails. They vary from yellow through to brown and have various different stripe patterns. Can be told there are two different species. One has a brown lip around the entrance, another has a pale lip around the entrance. And here's another slug. Rather an unusual way of identifying this one. It's a thing called the netted slug. If you hassle them a little bit, their slime is white. Don't think this one's going to cooperate, but if you bother them a little bit, then as they walk off, you'll find that the trail of slime behind is creamy in colour. We could be here some time waiting for that to happen though. Fast forward and maybe we might see it. Hello. So, in my ongoing quest to look underneath things, let's see what there is underneath some of these plant pots. I do like grubbing around under things. Something I would have expected to find perhaps, but I think that's an old blackbird egg. Whether it's hatched from a nearby nest and blown here, or whether that's a rather unpleasant result of an attack from a magpie, who knows, but a bit of an egg, which is unusual. All sorts of things underneath these pots. There are some millipedes, some more flatworms, woodlice. We'll have another closer look. So here's the little millipede from under the pot. It's an orange spotted snake millipede called Archiborreolus pallidus, and it goes to show the value of doing a bio-blitz. I've lived in this house for over 20 years, and this is a new species which I've never recorded in the garden before. One of the species of plants which I have planted into pots in my garden are some lilies, and that attracts another of these invasive alien species of pests, and there's a lily beetle. It's a very beautiful beetle, it's bright red. Hopefully I'll be able to show you one of those. But it doesn't do the lilies much good at all, so although I really like the beetle, I don't think many of the gardeners around here that are growing lilies would exactly be happy if I was to encourage them any further. But a fantastic beetle, but quite devastating for your lilies. Here's another invasive species. Not the bluebell, they're British native bluebells, but just there, that ladybird, that's the Harlequin ladybird. The Harlequin ladybird is probably one of the most invasive species in the world. It was introduced as a pest control system in a number of countries and has taken over, and it feeds on native ladybirds as well as the aphids that it was introduced to kill off. This ladybird's looking a little bit damaged. It looks like one of its wing cases hasn't quite formed properly. Harlequin ladybird wasn't actually introduced into this country. It arrived from Europe. I think it's native to Siberia originally, but it came across the channel, I think, from Belgium originally, and it's now spread to pretty much every corner of Britain, and certainly seems to be replacing some of our native species. This is a mason bee using the wall of my house for its nest. They're fairly harmless things. They don't really sting, and unless you've got a lot of them, they don't cause any problems. But they are a very good pollinator of plants in your garden, so quite nice. This one seems to be watching a tennis match somewhere. Well, I guess we knew it wouldn't be long before I found a harvestman. There aren't actually many around at this time of year, but this one is a thing called Platypus pinetorum, and it's a very scarce creature. In fact, the first ever record in Britain was from this very garden, and there aren't many records since, but there's a few places in Sheffield you might see it. But if you see one, I'd be very interested to hear about it. It's a lovely little beast. Let's disturb you a little bit. It's quite distinctive. It's got this some flecks of white on the back. It's a very well camouflaged creature. You can't really tell from this, but it's got some lovely white dagger-like spines on the mouth parts, just here at the front of the body. But don't think we can see them, but I'll zoom in and let's see if we can. So you're going to show the folks your lovely dagger-like mouth parts under here. Lovely little spines. Can you see them? No. Ooh. Not rushing about much, is it? Anyway, that's Platypus pinetorum. I suppose we could call it the pine harvestman, but quite scarce. Lovely. Come on, off you go. If you've got a compost bin or heap in your garden, it's an obvious place to look to add to your species list for your BioBlitz. There are plenty of woodlice and worms and more slugs and snails. There seem to be a lot of ants in here, which is not necessarily a bad thing. They do help to move the soil around in a compost bin, but perhaps can sometimes indicate that the compost bin's a bit too dry, so perhaps I need to water this one. You can see all the little grubs in the nest of the ants, and I've lifted the bin lid up so they're not very happy that the sun's shining on them, so the ants are going to very quickly move away their larvae into the shade and out of the light. Just looking for more species. So along the edge of the grass there's a little crab spider running along, and if we have a look around there pollinating the flowers is a honeybee. If you want to do a BioBlitz of your own garden, it doesn't have to be a special garden. Mine's quite small. There's quite a lot of lawn and concrete, but you can do a bit of wildlife gardening. I've added some meadow plants to this. There's some native bluebells. Just a bit of pot gardening. It's a great way to encourage flying insects once these flower. If you've done your BioBlitz and you've got a nice list of species, and some of them you know what they were, there are orange tips, blue tips, whatever you can identify, then if you go to the wildsheffield.com website, there's something called Nature Counts, which will allow you to add those records online, and they'll go straight to the National Biological Record Centre, where the information can be used for research and conservation.